All right. Nigeria, one of the biggest economies in West Africa, is reportedly contributing about 79% of all illicit financial flows lost in the sub-region.
Alarming, right? Well, according to the Global Financial Integrity Index, that's just a fraction of what the country is losing through these illicit flows. And we are talking about billions of dollars here.
It gives us a glimpse of how complex the threat landscape has become. From money laundering to terrorist financing and other illicit financial activities that undermine our economy and institutions.
And for years, this issue kept growing until February 2023, when the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, if you like, placed Nigeria on its grey list, flagging gaps in our efforts to tackle money laundering and terrorist financing.
Now, if you are placed on a grey list, it's a defining moment for you. It's a wake-up call, really, for you to strengthen your institutions, restore public trust and confidence, and also defend your financial reputation on the global stage. And that was the wake-up call for Nigeria.
And indeed, to be fair, Nigeria did rise up to that call, if you like, the challenge with regional and international support. We stepped up efforts to plug loopholes, improve compliance, and monitor financial transactions more closely.
At least, that is what the delisting tells us. Good news. After more than 2 years of intense reforms, Nigeria has now been officially delisted from that FATF grey list, as announced by the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, NFIU.
That's a big win. Oh, yes. But as the ovation continues, experts warn that this is not the time to relax. They're calling for stronger tracking systems, transparent reporting, and collective action across all sectors.
And there are implications, huge implications for the country. The informal financial system, for instance, you know, the SUSU and their jaws and all that, all of those are the shades.
What does that mean?
The SUSU is the traditional contributory system, you know, where you put in your small kobo and all that, you know.
I hear that is risky. Christmas is coming. Whoever you are contributing to may just...
That's exactly what we're saying, you know, and many Nigerians, of course, rely on that. But the question is, how do we regulate and strengthen the SUSU or their jaws? These are systems that are without, I mean, you know, losing their cultural essence. Still very important, you know, methods for people to really, you know, save. You didn't hear that from me, but it's, yeah.
Oh, well, I don't do a SUSU or a jaw, whatever it is, but you get to hear, if you are, you know, a fan of things like that, I'm sure Claire understands that better.
Absolutely.
You get to...
Every one of us, you know, growing up did do a jaw. I mean, it could be among your classmates, it could be, you know, with the other neighbors and all that. Just monthly contributions, you understand. But of course, like you mentioned, the risks are... Tess is laughing, I know.
All right. Well, that's our focus this morning on Good Morning Nigeria. How Nigeria can sustain the gains, keep up the momentum, and protect its economy from illicit financial flows.
It's a major milestone confirmed by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And so we'll be speaking with top experts and policymakers to understand the journey so far and, of course, what comes next. And should we also say congratulations. But for those of you who do Ajo and Isusu, please keep watching Good Morning Nigeria today so you know what you are in for. I am Claire Adelabu Abdurazak, and it's good to be back.
I wanted to say something, that those who do Ajo, Isusu, and the rest are Lapo babies. Those of us who don't are Nepo babies. Anyways, I'm Henry John. Thank you for joining us this lovely Tuesday live on the network service of the NTA. This is Good Morning Nigeria. Of course, you don't want to miss a bit of this program.
All right, welcome back to the program. It's Good Morning Nigeria. Now, I'm sure you'll be wondering what it means to be on a grey list of a international financial institution, or perhaps what it also means when you get delisted from that list. Don't worry, you'll get to know all about it. But the good news is that Nigeria recently got delisted from one of the most important, grade lists that, of course, Nigeria, was placed on some years back. And that, for us, is a big win. But before we bring in our, guests to speak to the issues, let's listen to the background report. And it's put together by our correspondent, Musa Babalio.
The grey list, officially termed jurisdictions under increased monitoring, is maintained by the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, an intergovernmental body that establishes global standards to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Countries are added to the grey list when identified as having weaknesses in their anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing frameworks. Nigeria was placed on the FATF grey list on February 24, 2023, following a mutual evaluation and revealed deficiencies in areas such as transparency of beneficial ownership, oversight of non-financial sectors like real estate and legal services, and the effectiveness of law enforcement in prosecuting money laundering and terrorist financing cases. The current administration committed to an action plan to address these issues, leading to Nigeria's removal from the list on October 24, 2025.
A record of 4 countries have been removed from the grey list. The countries are Burkina Faso, Mozambique, Nigeria, and South Africa. Nigeria now has a stronger interagency coordination. Mozambique has improved financial intelligence sharing. And Burkina Faso has enhanced financial oversight of financial institutions and gatekeepers.
The Global Watchdog Agency noted that Nigeria demonstrated significant progress through reforms, including improved financial intelligence sharing.
These transformations will help better protect communities that are harmed by crime and corruption, those living in fear of terrorist attacks, families with life savings drained by fraud and cybercrime.
The country's Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, has recovered more than 566.3 billion naira illicit funds and more than 1,500 properties acquired through fraudulent means in the last 2 years in the country. Nigeria's exit from the grey list after approximately 2 years and 8 months is expected to boost investor confidence and facilitate smoother cross-border financial transactions.
Many thanks, Musa Babali, for that background report. Now time to introduce our guest right here in the studio. And right here with us is Mohammed Ahmed, the Chief of Staff to the CEO of NFIU, that's the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit. Many thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
All right. Also here is Olagoke Said Salau, who is an anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism strategist and head of financial crimes compliance at Sterling Bank. Many thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here.
All right. Also here is Grace Orahachi Ehusani, Esquire, head of chambers at Greenfield Chambers, Abuja. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Welcome.
All right. And of course, joining us from our Benin studio is Reverend David Ugolo, Executive Director, African Network for Environment and Economic Justice. Thank you. Reverend David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me this morning.
And you're also a member of the Interim Executive Council of the Non-State Actors, NSA, of African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption. Always a pleasure. Thank you. Joining us also from Carroll in Taraba State, Northeast Nigeria, is Dr. Samson Galadima Simon. Dr. Simon is Chief Economist, ARKK Economics and Data Limited. Dr. Galadima Simon, I see you smiling. Thank you for joining us all the way from Taraba State. How is Taraba today?
Fine, thank you. It's actually in Gombe State.
Oh, okay, Gombe. Well, sorry for this, well, Taraba, Gombe. Maybe one of these days.
Yes, it's actually very close to Taraba.
Exactly.
So maybe that's why.
Exactly. I hope it's not too hot, or is it?
No, it's not. Thank you for having me.
All right. Gentlemen and lady, thank you for joining us for this conversation. And I'll start straight away with the NFIU, of course, official here with us. I think it's a good place to start. When you're placed on a grey list, it means there are reasons for concern. And of course, there's also the other part, which means you are trying to do something about those concerns, but they're not enough. But can you walk us through, in the first place, the red flags that got this international watchdog worried?
Okay. Certainly, I'll be happy to do that. And thank you very much for having us here this morning. I think when we talk about Nigeria being placed on the grey list, we have to start really from what the FATF does, as your correspondent did in his presentation. And the FATF as a body sets international standards to protect the global community from the threats of money laundering and terrorism financing. And what they've done is they've established a set of standards which all countries across the world have to abide by. And all countries are assessed against these standards. So it talks about things like how your agencies work together, whether you've effectively criminalized money laundering and terrorism financing, do you have sufficient law enforcement agencies and regulatory bodies, and do they have the powers to do their jobs? So in 2018, 2019, Nigeria was assessed against this standard. And basically,
is it the only watchdog, international watchdog that does this?
For money laundering and terrorism financing, yes. It is the single body that does this globally. And like I said, all countries have to be assessed against this. Okay. So when we were assessed in 2018, 2019, the result of that assessment was that, first, our legal framework was not consistent with the standards that the FATF had set. But even more worryingly, it wasn't just that the legal framework was deficient, it was that our institutions were not effectively carrying out their jobs. So they identified that our government agencies were not collaborating, were not working together. We had insufficient supervision of the regulated sector, so both the financial institutions and the designated non-financial institutions, so real estate companies, your legal professions. And we weren't really going after the most serious criminal offenses that faced us in Nigeria. So this then gave rise to the report, which was published in 2021. And that report identified 84 strategic deficiencies across the entirety of our national AML, CFT, anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing framework. And the FATF... 84, yes, which were very, very serious.
You said 2018?
It was, the assessment was in 2019, but because of COVID, the report was not published till 2021. So really, when that report came out, there was a very clear message to Nigeria that we had to do something to address these deficiencies that were identified. And we were given a one-year window to take action to address these deficiencies. And because of, at that time, the urgent attention that was paid to this issue, over a period of that 1 year, we were able to address 69 of those deficiencies. But we had 19 deficiencies that were considered to still be strategic and very, very important. And in February 2023, based on these 19 deficiencies, the Financial Action Task Force placed us on the grey list. And we committed as a country to address these deficiencies over a two-year period. So from February 2023 till May 2025. And I think thanks to all the excellent work that was done by all the public agencies, as well as our friends from the private sector, we actually did meet this deadline. We completed all the actions by May 2025, which subsequently led to the decision last week to remove Nigeria.
So you're saying that all the 84 deficiencies have been met. They are now superb, and they met international standard according to the FATF, is that what? Is that what it is?
I would even argue that in many cases we are even exceeding the international standards. So if you look at, for instance, Nigeria's implementation of beneficial ownership information, so that is understanding who actually owns the legal persons that operate in the country. Nigeria actually has an international world-leading standard for beneficial ownership information. In terms of some of the work that we're doing in the supervision of some of our sectors, whether it's the financial institutions or the legal profession, we're actually doing things that are very innovative and new. In terms of our collaborative nature, as you can see from when the FATF president made her statement, she really recognized the fact that all our agencies are now working together in a way that is a model for the world. So I don't think we have met them. We have actually exceeded many of these standards.
Well, Mohammed,
yes.
Critics say that some of these changes you have talked about that have met international standards are actually on paper, not in real work, as in real enforcement. Would you agree with that?
Well, I don't think we will agree with the position that these are on paper. I think because this assessment is very, very rigorous, over that 2-year period, we had to produce reports every 4 months showing the actions that have been taken. And it's not just about having these policies and frameworks in paper. You actually have to demonstrate the outcomes they're achieving. So you can't say that we are working together as law enforcement and not show that that is leading to investigations, prosecutions, and convictions. And we have actually been able to provide this data, which shows that, for instance, the FIU, the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, is getting suspicious transaction reports from the financial institutions. It is providing these reports to law enforcement, and these are being used in cases in court to lead to convictions and to asset recovery. So we do have the evidence which shows that these changes are initial.
So far, from the years we were put on this grey list till now, what actual convictions, or if you like, asset recoveries and deterrent measures that you think has proved that the system is working?
So it's not just one single set of convictions or one single set of asset recoveries, it's the overall picture. So when we were placed on the grey list, as I said, if you looked at the number of convictions that we had, for instance, related to maybe drug trafficking or terrorism financing, those tended to focus more on the actual drug trafficking offense itself. Now what we have done is we have recognized as a country that it's not just enough to convict someone for drug trafficking. You actually have to take away the money, the proceeds that come from that crime. And that is the easiest and the quickest way to deter people from engaging in crime. If someone engages in crime but still has access to his resources, there's little incentive for us to comply. So over, as the graphic in your initial inserts showed, the EFCC has multiple billion recoveries, and this is across the board for all our institutions, whether it's the NDLEA, the ICPC, or the DSS that is leading on terrorism financing. We're able to show that we're achieving these very, very significant outcomes. Before we escalate the conversation to our other guests, I'd just like to ask one more question, because it's very interesting. Sometimes the public is not aware of all of what is going, so we dwell on old information, but it's good to know that 84 concerns raised by this international watchdog have been addressed by Nigeria. That's good to hear. But in the area of synergy among the agencies, especially in terms of intelligence sharing, do you see adequate cooperation? Because I understand that some agencies act independently and shy away from sharing intelligence. Well, I'm glad that you talked about the perceptions rather than the reality of what's actually on ground. And I think it's very important to reflect that, yes, each individual agency has its own mandate and specific responsibilities, whether it's to do with intelligence or the investigative phase. But we now essentially all recognize that we are part of one single criminal value chain, right? So it's not just that the one agency is carrying out an investigation. That investigation, for instance, may have an impact on work that the other agency is doing. So, for instance, if you look at, let's take human trafficking as an example, there is an agency that's responsible for investigating human trafficking, but there's also collaboration between them and the agencies that are responsible for investigating financial crime, because there are two elements to this. There's a human trafficking offense, and then there's the investigation of how the funds that come out of that human trafficking are being laundered, whether it's through investment in real estate or others. So this synergy is actually very, very important. And if you really pay attention to the efforts from these agencies, you'll see there's a lot more interagency collaboration and discussion around how to address these issues working together.
All right, many thanks, Mohammed. Let's get to Olagoke now. Interesting, listening to Mohammed about all that Nigeria has done and some of these measures. But, a lot of people expect that by now we should be seeing some economic relief if this is really working. And I'd like to find out, in your own view, do you think all of this will translate to improved access to Forex, more investor confidence, a better economic life for Nigerians generally?
Thank you for that question. Absolutely. And I mean, the question is spot on because we just spoke about it earlier on before coming in here. And so, I mean, the expectation is as we got off the grey list, you immediately see wonders, but that's not how it works. So you get off the grey list, people begin to see the reforms, people begin to see, the investor confidence begins to boost gradually, and then you begin to see some of these changes happen, over time. So maybe we might not see those changes immediately. I mean, it just happened on Friday. I mean, we can start looking maybe till next year, and then we can begin to see some of the larger changes. But absolutely, in the financial sector, for example, one of the things we expect to see is easier transactions. I mean, as a financial institution, we have a lot of collaborations with correspondents, foreign investors, creditors, and what have you. And one of the hassles, one of the real pains in the financial sector is, one, risk-based premium. Right? Because we are in a high-risk jurisdiction, or perceived as high-risk jurisdiction, what you often see is that people who want to give you funds will apply a risk-based premium because they are working in a high-risk jurisdiction. That's one. Two, people you do business with outside the country, they are expected to do something called enhanced due diligence. So what that means is that they are going to put you through a lot of hoops, a lot of documentation. So where you would have typically submitted 2-3 documentations, close the deal. Now you have to submit about 15 documentations. There are going to be physical visits. There's going to be a lot of questions and all that. So overall, I expect, one, a lot of lowering in transaction fees, which I believe will dissipate to the global economy, to the national economy. The second thing I expect to see as well is more open, like an open economy, because more people will come in. There will be some level of confidence in terms of coming into the country, doing business, because of that. That proclamation that we are now strategically taking the AML CFT program as a country very, very importantly. So, absolutely.
It's very interesting. Grace, I just want you to give us an overview of what you think about our enforcement, our laws, in terms of the enforcement laws that he talked about, which are now working together. What are your views? What are your perspectives? Do you really think there's synergy now?
Thank you very much for that question. I believe there is synergy. The problem with Nigeria has not been whether we have the laws or not. It's been the implementation all the while. But, with the move towards this getting out of the grey list, there's been so much synergy by agencies and even, the NBA to ensure that there is implementation of this law, that the implementation of this law is not just in paper, like we have said earlier. It goes down to the gatekeepers, the individual sectors, the individual entities to ensure that we actually combat, terrorism financing, we actually combat money laundering. So the law, as far as I am concerned and from my perspective, is strong enough, to help us continue to maintain and sustain where we are at this point and even do more, referring to the Act, the 2022 Act. It is strong enough. The earlier Act that was repealed as the 2011 Act did not capture, the virtual assets. But with the 2022 Act, virtual asset is captured and all other aspects is captured, making our legal regime strong enough to sustain and ensure enforcement down to the entities.
All right, Grace. Sorry, let's bring in Dr. Simon. Dr. Simon, I want you to speak to legal instruments, especially the Money Laundering Act and, of course, the proceeds. How do you think, or how do you think that they have, worked to the extent that the FA, I'm trying to get the FATF, you know, has directed, or, you know.
Because if these laws, you know, we came up with particularly 2 laws, Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022, and then Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022, amongst other reforms. And if these laws have not been effective, the FATF wouldn't have removed Nigeria from the grey list. So by removing Nigeria from the grey list, the body is trying to say that our reforms are working. However, we have this 12-month post-observation period between now and next year to see if these reforms are sustainably enforced. So it's not yet Uhuru. While it's good news, we are celebrating being removed from that list. I think we should be cautious. It should be cautious optimism that things are looking up, because we need to maintain and sustain these reforms so that we can permanently be far away from the grey list as much as possible.
Thanks, Dr. Simon. Many thanks for your opening comments. Mohammed actually thinks that we've gone past that 1-year monitoring window, but I'm sure he would respond much later, you know, to your response. But I'd like to get to Reverend Ugolo now. People think that Nigerians shouldn't celebrate just yet, you know, just like Dr. Simon was trying to say, and all of that. But I'd like you to speak to us about if you think that Nigeria has built enough internal systems to prevent a relapse, you know, that could return us to the grey list. Because, I mean, some say we still have a lot of institutional issues, weak governance, corruption here and there. So do you think that this is sustainable?
And thank you very much. I think this is quite good way to, again, reflect where we are coming from. Like my fellow panelists there have also provided a very rich background, particularly looking at where we are coming from and the context. But I just also want to draw the attention to the fact that this is not the first time Nigeria is green-listed. In 2001, Nigeria was listed as a result of poor institutional framework in the country. Then there was no EFCC, poor institutional background, the legal framework was very poor, absence of money laundering laws, and all this put together, Nigeria was green-listed. So in 2006, we have EFCC, and some institutional framework was put in place, and then Nigeria came out of the list. And again now, Nigeria is green-listed in 2023, and in 2025, we have Nigeria now removed from the list. So there are potential that if this reform is not sustained, Nigeria could be relisted. And that is a potential that we don't want to see because of obvious implication. The damage it has done to the country. Unfortunately, we are currently celebrating the removal from this list. If you put in perspective the economic loss, particularly the private sector, and the Nigerian government is huge, is enormous. Between this period of time, Nigeria was on the list. It would be good to appreciate this because for Nigerian government to put this out there in the public, what we really lost as a result of being listed, because our businesses suffered most. The cost of doing business in Nigeria was huge. And so the legal framework that are put in place today and those actions that have been addressed, like our colleague from NFI who have identified, need to be sustained. And I'm happy that the level of engagement of the presidency is very huge, particularly when we looked how this whole journey started with the visit of the Chief of Staff to the NFIU, the involvement of the presidency. That is a political will that is required to sustain this reform in the country. Without the political will from the presidency, there's nothing we can do. But now that we have that political support from the highest level of power in the country, under the leadership of the president, it is our hope that this reform will be sustained and be deepening, and so that we don't get re-enlisted again, and so that the benefit, which my colleagues have also identified, in terms of reduction of cost, even the banks in their correspondent banking relationship, it will be easier. And then in terms of the benefit of inflow of foreign investment, it will increase. And that invariably will impact on our economy. And that again will help again generate job. And the unemployment level will reduce. And because of this benefit that we anticipate to come from this removal of Nigeria from the grey list, it is incumbent upon Nigerians, irrespective of our political affiliation, and all stakeholders must put heads together to continue to support the law enforcement agency to sustain their work. Particularly, I am gladdened that in the last few weeks now, EFCC have come out in their 2 years mid-report where they have shown the amount of enormous resources they have recovered. That wouldn't be possible without this kind of reform we are talking about. So that we can be putting this whole issue in perspective. EFCC will not be able to recover all these huge resources because in each time they carry out their investigation, they need interagency cooperation, like our colleague in the panel rightly noted. So that interagency cooperation will help empower each of the institutions that are listed in the Proceeds of Crime Act, which is POCA, that provides the legal architectural framework for asset recovery in the country, because we must ensure that crime does not pay. Illicit financial flow does not help the economy, because like my colleague there also mentioned about the issue of transparency in beneficial ownership. If we don't know the ownership of entities that are involved in corruption, there is no way we can carry out proper investigation and proper law enforcement. Then that brings me to the judiciary. The judiciary has got a great role to play. If people are not prosecuted and you sustain a culture of impunity, we could reverse back. We could be re-enlisted. And so that is why organizations like ours, the African Network for Environment and Economic Justice, and our partners, the African Center and the Development Agency, are working together, like FCDO, the UK government, and other entities are working together to partner with the federal government to deepen this reform. And I'm happy under the leadership of the Federal Minister of Justice is providing that leadership. If you look at the POCA regulation, for example, that provides a tool for proper coordination. And if you look also to the issue of the data, the central database, which currently sits in the Federal Ministry of Justice, where all data on asset recoveries are stored, that again demonstrates the evidence of interagency cooperation. And that's something we want to see deepening and as we go forward. Because without that, the potential to relapse back, to be re-enlisted, is there. And so what should be the role of all stakeholders? Key stakeholders like EFCC, NFIU, they must all continue to sustain and deepen this interagency cooperation. And then the federal government, under the president, need to provide that political support, because all these institutions require support. Otherwise, the implementation of the Proceeds of Crime Act will be very weak. It will be difficult. And that will lead us to more relapsing back to where we are coming from, so that we don't return back. Because each time we return back, the country loses, because the economic implication is unimaginable. And it puts the country's image in a very bad situation. It doesn't help the investors to come into the country. It will not help our economy to grow. And when that doesn't happen, and that's the impact, the level of increase of illicit financial flow out of the country will increase. And once more resources are stolen and taken out of the country, there will be no resources to carry out infrastructural development. The fact that EFCC, NFIU, and other key agencies are working closely under this framework to deepen and sustain this reform, it will send confidence to the international community and foreign direct investment and key investment like the Dangote oil refinery and others will be doing well, and that will help. I'm happy that I just read in the newspaper that Dangote was saying that the foreign currency like dollar is going to crash, and that kind of positive message coming from private sectors is very important for the economy to grow. And so we must congratulate the entire law enforcement agency, EFCC, NFIU, the president for this achievement. And all we need to do is to sustain and continue to mobilize Nigerians to support this process.
Reverend David Ugalo, thank you. Thank you. I mean, you've made very robust contribution, this morning. Thank you very much. We'll return to you in a short while. Let me come back now to the Chief of Staff to the CEO of the NFRU. And, I'd like to make this, conversation down to earth, so that the person watching, the viewer watching, will be able to understand his or her place within this conversation. And that's why I'm going to ask you, because, you hear a lot of, Nigerians talk about the manner in which the anti-graft agencies, go about their assignments, their responsibilities. And most times we hear people talk about prejudices, in carrying out, the investigations and all that. And even when it comes to utilizing the process of crime, the path to that, are rarely transparent. How do you respond to those questions?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think the perspective that I would take is I would borrow from what our good friend, the Reverend, has just said, and it's about the transparency of the data, right? So if you take from the perspective of how the proceeds of crime are utilized, based on the Proceeds of Crime Regulation and Management Act that we now have, there's a transparent process for how those proceeds of crimes are followed, how they are maintained, how they are managed, and how they are reported. And I think this visibility into that process, whether it's through the data framework that he mentioned or through other reporting mechanisms, can demonstrate the sort of how those proceeds of crimes are collected and how they are not utilized for purposes that people don't understand. And I think it's very important to reflect that the Attorney General of the Federation and Honorable Minister of Justice has taken a strong lead in this area to make sure that all the agencies are essentially collaborating and providing that transparency of data. And I think it's also clear that some of the work that we've done over the last 2 to 3 years in terms of making sure that there are standardized operating procedures for investigations and prosecutions are also helping. But I don't think any agency will, of course, investigate a matter purely because they want to, if you like, stamp on anyone's toes. There's clear guidelines for how investigations are carried out. There are clear guidelines for how prosecutions are carried out. And this is something that has been institutionalized in each of the investigating agencies. So I think Nigerian citizens should not have any fear that the powers that these agencies have will be...
The concern is that even the big ones, who are supposed to have been, chased after, sometimes you guys turn, the other cheek. And then you look for the small ones that,
Well, I think, again, this is an issue of perception, right? And I think the perception is, yes, they...
Is it really an issue of perception? Because we've seen people defect from one party to the other and probably...
I didn't want to go to the political aspect.
Well, in terms of political matters, I think what we are talking about is a different issue here. What we are talking about is how the agencies are investigating and prosecuting crimes, right? And like I said, there are very clear procedures and policies and guidelines for how these investigations are carried out. And these agencies, these procedures and policies and the guidelines are essentially, they are blind to whether there's political affiliation or not. And the agencies do carry out their work. They do carry out their investigations and prosecutions to the extent that the evidence is available to carry out this work. So this is very important for us to reflect. And this is something that has also been reflected in the assessment that has been carried out by the FATF about the ability of Nigeria to investigate complex money laundering crimes, which is essentially what you're talking about here. Complex money laundering, whether it's related to corruption or to fraud or other issues, we have demonstrated that we are able to carry out these investigations.
But what about corruption that has to do with people in government? Has the agencies been able to do the needful in that regard? Because, I mean, that's like the main issue. People always say that... you say it's perception, but the perception is if you're being found guilty of, anything, right? And then you align with maybe a party in power, then you get shielded, right? So is that a perception, or is that in reality?
First, I think it's a perception, and I think again it goes back to the point that the Reverend made about the effectiveness of the judiciary, making sure that when these cases are brought before the judiciary, that they are effectively adjudicated and there is effective sanctions that are applied. So the law enforcement agencies are doing their jobs; they're carrying out these investigations and prosecutions, and we believe that the judiciary is also doing its job within the context that it has to take these decisions to effectively sanction any offenders that are brought.
All right, Grace, you tell us the pace.
Sorry, Henry. I was trying to get the details of the mutual evaluation report,
yes,
2023.
Yes,
and I'm not sure if there is a low level of dissemination on other crimes,
yes,
particularly cybercrime and human trafficking. This was what was flagged.
Exactly. And like I said, if you go back to the point I made at the beginning, the report did identify a lot of deficiencies. And these are some of the deficiencies that were identified not in 2023, but in 2019. And that report was published in 2021. So all the actions that we have taken since that mutual evaluation report was published in 2021 has been to address some of the deficiencies that have been identified in that report, whether, as you said, is our ability to follow the most complex crimes or our ability to focus attention on those crimes that are particularly relevant to us. And I think going back to the point that our colleague from Gombe made, the 1 year post-observation period was in that period after the report was published from 2021 to 2022. So that 1 year observation period was just for us to see, okay, how do we address those 84 deficiencies? And we've already come past that stage. And I think the signal from the FATF accepting that we have made progress is very, very important. Now, this is not to say that we have reached the final bus stop, if you like. What the FATF have said is they have seen that we have political commitment and political will in Nigeria to address these issues, to continue to sustain these reforms, and they are convinced that the trajectory that we're on is a very positive one. And if we sustain that trajectory, then we will be in a position where we are very effective at countering the most serious threats that face us, not just in Nigeria, but across the region and globally from illicit finance.
What did the FATF report say about the proceeds of crime, how they are being utilized? Because there's also a perception that, you know, the proceeds of crime are either re-looted or, I don't know, there are so many issues around that. So, but what did this report say about Nigeria's use of proceeds of crime?
So if you, again, go back to the context, in 2020, or rather in 2019, when the evaluation was carried out, there was no proceeds of crime regulation. There was no law about proceeds of crime in Nigeria. So again, one of the first things that we did after that report was published was to look at our legal framework. What are the gaps and what do we need to address? So again, we passed the Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022 with the support of the National Assembly and all the stakeholders. We passed the Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act in 2022, and then also the Proceeds of Crime Recovery and Management Act also in 2022. So there was a major effort to address the foundation of the national framework. That gives us now the basis to support all our agencies to improve their effectiveness. So yes, the report identified that there were some gaps in terms of how Nigeria was not only managing the proceeds of crime, but also how we were reporting those proceeds of crime. And that was then addressed in the law that was passed, as well as all the actions that have been taken by the Ministry of Justice, as Reverend David has mentioned, in terms of creating that overall national interagency framework for managing, recovering, and reporting the proceeds of crime through the data framework, but also through the interagency committee that has been set up.
I asked the previous question about if all of this is not just what is on paper as regards as compared to implementation. For the proceeds of crime, for example, do you think that we're beginning to feel the impacts of this proceeds of crime being used judiciously, you know, for the betterment of Nigerians and
Yes, I believe. I mean, if you in the last week, I think there was the executive chairman of the EFCC did come out and talked about how some of the funds that have been invested in the Nigerian Education Loan Fund have been from proceeds that have been recovered from illicit actors. I think he mentioned that about 100 billion naira has been put into this education loan fund, which is going to support our students in tertiary education, to allow them to go to school, to allow them to acquire skills, which will help them to build productive futures for themselves. So there is very clear connection between how proceeds of crime are being recovered and how they are being invested into our infrastructure and into our citizens as well.
All right, just to let our viewers know that they can contribute, send their comments, their questions, as regards to this topic. The number is on the screen. You can either send an SMS or a WhatsApp message. Do not attempt to call, just messages only. And, of course, I'm sure our guests will attend to them.
Of course. So let's come to Salau. During that period, Nigerian banks went through a lot. I mean, obviously, issues of compliance, checks, issues of confidence and all that. And then you also had maybe reduced, international transactions, and all that. How do you think Nigerian banks can rebuild that trust now internationally?
Thank you very much. So the first thing we can do is by taking the learnings from what we have done over this period and improving on it and sustaining it. That's the key thing. Over this 2-3 year period, it has been heavy work. Collaborating with the regulators, collaborating with the intelligence agencies, law enforcement. It has really been a public-private partnership. Everybody coming together to improve and elevate the program.
Did the banks actually collaborate? I mean, did the banks actually, collaborate? I should be asking the Chief of Staff, but to what extent?
Oh, absolutely. We collaborated 1,000%. And maybe I'll allow the Chief of Staff to also comment on that. But I believe the reason why I'm here is because we have a very, very good synergy. And it's something that I believe as part of the reforms, we are growing on it. We are putting a lot of energy into making sure that we maintain this relationship. Because the truth is, if the FIs, which are the reporting entities, which generate the information that goes to the FIU, which the FIU sends to the LEAs, if there's no collaboration, the truth is that chain is broken.
How come all the ransoms paid and all that through banks?
Yes. So there are a number of complexities around how these things work. There are a number of... so first of all, you must remember that banks are not the only financial institutions. There are different types of financial institutions.
But these monies are paid into banks. The transactions are carried, from one bank to the other.
Yes. In some scenarios. There are a number of other things. There is, payments. There is money, mobile money. There is, virtual assets. There are a number of other sectors. However, the truth is, more often than not, those transactions are reported. Most transactions are reported. You must also understand that there's a process flow for these things. As a bank, you just you get funds and then you start looking. We have a process flow for seeing transactions that are unusual, investigating them, identifying if they are suspicious, and then reporting through the.
What about transactions?
Sorry. So these ransoms paid. Are you telling us that most of them are not traceable?
No, I didn't say they are not traceable.
Okay.
In more often than not, they are traceable. So the first thing we must know is how are the transactions profiled, right? In a lot of instances, if you are able to identify that the transactions are unusual and are suspicious, they will be reported. So you must also understand that the guys who do these things are also very, very intelligent. Oftentimes we like to think the people who carry out these crimes are, they are very smart people. They also know the laws, they know the thresholds, they know how to bypass these things, and oftentimes they work with a wide network of collaborators. But nothing less than...
or insider.
And in some cases, insiders. It's possible, right? But one thing I can assure you of is that the financial institutions will not lower their integrity because of... if you look at what I just explained, I talked about lowering transaction costs, public partnerships, international partnerships. The banks will not lower their standards for, minute process of crime when we have bigger things that we're looking at.
If you said the banks would not lower their standards, what are the banks doing, to the insiders who sometimes aid these crimes?
Oh, yes, there are a number of things. And there are a number of regulations that have come out to guide how we do these things. So we now have a strengthened framework for identifying people who have been identified to be, willing enablers of these, crimes. And then there is now a process for blacklisting people in the industry. So we have a framework from the regulator that tells you...
When you say blacklist, what does that mean? So
it means you cannot work in the industry anymore. You have strenuous and very high friction in opening accounts. You can't... it's basically sort of excluding you from society. So it's really bad. And I believe that is a firm and strong deterrent to anybody who tries to enable financial crimes within the financial system.
Okay, but what's the banking system also doing to protect in terms of technology-wise now? Because in the past, we've seen how people who are insiders in the banks, get out of the banks and then begin to carry out some form of actions, and some banks had that in the past where, you know, they had to begin to change platforms and all because of some threats to the whole technology and all, security and all. So do you think that the banks are stronger now, technology-wise, to protect, you know, its integrity?
Oh, absolutely. So, you know, everything in terms of processes, procedures, technology, it advances every time. So the same way the criminals are advancing, the controls, the mitigants are also advancing. Today we have a number of things. There's something called segregation of duty. There's also something called Chinese walls. Basically what it means is that as one person in a financial system, you do not have knowledge about the entirety of the flow. It doesn't happen. Nobody can take something from point A and finish it. There's always segregation of duty. There will be a maker. There will probably be a checker. There's also Chinese walls in the sense that you do not understand fully, and you are not allowed to understand fully what's happening in the next department for your safety, for the safety of the financial institution and the ecosystem. So there's a number of these kind of, you know, soft processes. Then there are also hard processes in place in terms of the technology themselves. You know, they have securities in place. You know, we have timeouts, passwords, you know, pins. So there are a number of security things that do not allow you as a, you know, as an insider, just utilize or manipulate the system for your own benefit. And we keep on getting stronger on those things, especially with new regulations and new processes and technology.
Thank you very much, Lagake. Grace, the judiciary, of course, is you know, key in all of this. Mohammed was trying to say that when it comes to enforcement, so if you like, the judiciary process, you know, you're being transparent. But I'm thinking that, do you choose the cases that are fast and the ones that are slow? Because pace has been a big issue, where you find a situation, someone is taken to court and then it takes years, and sometimes we never ever get to hear about such cases. Files are missing and all of that. So what do you think judiciary can do, just so that we do not relapse? Right, we're out of it. That's good news. But just so that corruption cases are dealt with as they should, as fast as possible, and you know, without some form of should I say preference to certain people, and then, like Claire was trying to say, the big people get out, the small people get put in jail.
Thank you very much for that. I'll start by, I understand that pace has been a problem, but we have now in our criminal justice system where time is allotted for, you know, the prosecution of criminal offenses. The certain number of adjournments that you can take in criminal cases is well stated in the rules of court. So usually, if it is a criminal case, the prosecution cannot take number of adjournments, neither can the defense take a number of adjournments. The problem now is that oftentimes, as you know, in every other sector, there are problems. One is you have maybe witnesses are not available. That's one. Witnesses are not available. Or the prosecutor has not fully investigated the crime or the offense, so they do not have all that is required to prove the offense. That's another issue. Then, of course, when it comes to the defense, there may be issues here and there. The defense is sick, and we see that all the time. Maybe the defendant is sick and all that. But the rules are there to ensure that the prosecution of offenses, particularly criminal offenses from the, you know, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, to ensure that it is within a pace that it is speedily adjudicated. Now, to answer what can be done, really, like I said, I think it's about sustaining what we have and establishing, you know, a framework that cannot be easily manipulated. But in prosecution, you're dealing with human beings. In prosecution of offenses, you're dealing with human beings. If somebody comes and files a letter of adjournment saying that a witness is sick or a witness is bereaved, what can you do in such situations? Really, you have to consider that person. So that's what oftentimes curtails the process of speedy adjudication. But I can't say categorically that our criminal justice system has a framework to ensure that criminal cases are speedily dispensed.
What about gifts? A lot of people have raised questions about the gifts judiciary and its officers receive from, if you like, some want to say politicians, some want to say those in government and all of that. Does that affect how the system works?
Well, my answer to that is there will always be people that will try to manipulate a justice system. And that is where the issue of gifts come. But I believe that it doesn't take away from the process itself. It doesn't take away from the adjudication process itself. We have cases, we have instances where justices have rejected gifts. Even court staffs have rejected gifts, you know, just to ensure that this criminal justice system, this criminal justice process is transparent, it is free from manipulation, and it achieves the desired result, which is in the end actually stopping crime.
All right, thank you. So Reverend David Ugolo, my question is to you. You sit on the board of African Union Advisory Against Corruption. That's and also a reverend. So I'm just going to take my question from the two, areas that you sit on. Do you believe that faith-based organizations, you know, the money is collected, do you believe that they should be subjected to external audit or even, subjected to financial disclosures? I mean, some time ago, you know, the conversation around this, you know, was on, you know. But what do you think within the context of our discussion?
Sorry, the line didn't get clear very well. If you don't mind, if you can just repeat your question, please.
I'm just asking, you know, as someone who is advocating accountability and who sits on the African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption, do you think, or what's your perspective about, you know, opinions that faith-based organizations should also be subjected to external audit or, you know, financial disclosures?
I completely agree with you. If the churches, the religious body need to be subject to the Financial Reporting Council rules and regulation. If you have seen some of faith groups and faith organizations that are from Nigeria, you have seen what they have faced in England. There are a number of churches who are currently operating in England, and because they go against the rules of transparency and accountability, you see what has happened to some of those kind of faith organizations. And so compliance with rules that increases transparency and accountability, it helped the organization, it helped the credibility of the organization, it helped the institution. It's not just for the country alone. So I completely agree that faith groups need to comply. Otherwise, they can become a source of money laundering. We have seen a situation where faith groups are used to launder money out of the country. And we have also seen situations where the owners, I use the word deliberately, as an ordained minister for the last 30 years, I have seen the increasing wealth with some faith group. You cannot easily trace where the money is coming from. It doesn't help the country. It also adds to the image challenge that we face. And it's not just one particular religion. It are cut across. And if you also see the source of terrorism financing, it's also cut across the religion. So if we put rules and standards in place that they have to comply with, it helps the image of the country. And it also helps the image of the good ones. We should be able to separate the bad one from the good ones. It's only when there is a compliance with the rules. So I completely agree. And I am in support. I advocate for a strong rules that will enable the faith groups to comply with rules so that we can keep the image. Like we are currently celebrating now. We need to sustain this celebration. We need to sustain this victory because it's good. We are celebrating this victory, but sustaining it is the most important thing. Like I will also say that, how do we sustain this? It is incumbent upon all stakeholders, the faith group, the private sector. They all must rise to the responsibility to comply with the rules. And that's why I'm very excited about some innovations in the Proceeds of Crime Act, particularly the non-conviction-based aspect of the law, which now provides opportunity for law enforcement agency to track unexplained wealth of particularly the politically exposed persons in the country. For example, if you go to the real estate sector, we see buildings across Abuja and that are traced to politically exposed persons whose income is not commensurate with the properties we see that are associated with them. And a classical example of this is the last CBN governor, who has so much asset that you cannot trace to one visible income that is linked to that kind of asset. When you have such situation, it adds to the image problem of the country, because we're not just talking about the Yahoo boys and girls alone. We're also talking about adults who God, by grace, give them the opportunity to occupy position in public sector in the country. Rather than using this position to advance the good of the country, they have brought shame and disgrace and embarrassment. So this victory we are celebrating today under President Tinubu, we need to sustain it, and we must continue to help to support the law enforcement agency, and the judiciary has got a role to play. And I'm happy that that conversation came up again, because another thing again is that, and this is the message that I would like to appeal to the Federal Ministry of Justice under the leadership of the minister to continue to sustain the training of the judiciary in compliance with the rules and regulations.
Yes, Reverend Ugolo, thank you. And I'm glad you stopped at that with the former CBN governor, because, of course, that matter, we all know, is still in court. So, but just before we take our break, I'd like to ask you if you feel there are signs, that, you know, these are the proceeds from these faith-based organizations are diverted, you know, for purposes that could raise some legal concerns. Reverend Ugolo, please, I hope you heard me. When we come back from the break, you'll respond to this question.
You have no better friend and partner than Nigeria. Let this unveiling today be a call to conscience. Let our practitioners hold the line of truth. To the media, please inform with integrity and with a deep sense of patriotism. To our public officers, communicate with transparency. To citizens, please let us speak with empathy. Let us come together to become the voice of responsibility, the voice of the world that heals division, that inspires hope and drives development.
Lagos, Port Harcourt, Abuja, the city is moving. New voices, heavy drip, all heart. From the streets to the stage, this is the next Afrobeat star.
Yo, yo, yo! What are we here for? Let's Afrobeat star! Let's get nasty!
And the talents from all over showed up to own the room. But they're not alone.
Spiritual. Gospel.
All chasing a slot to face the judges. Puffy T, SARS, Andre Vibes, P Pride. Catch next Afrobeat star on.
All right, welcome back to the program. Good morning, Nigeria. Let me bring in Reverend Ugolo. I've just been corrected. Yenre here allowed me to be calling Ugolo. Reverend Ugolo, if you're with us, please. I asked a question before we went on break. I just wanted to seek your opinion. If there are signs that this faith, proceeds from the faith-based organizations do get diverted, for purposes that could raise some form of legal concerns.
Yes, but we have to be very careful because we have different faith groups in the country. If maybe less than 1 or 2% of these faith groups are involved in activity that is unacceptable, we shouldn't use that to generalize and bring in a sweeping negative image for the faith groups. So in every sector, we do have bad eggs. But what I am saying very clearly is that the rules and regulations must cut across all the sector, and including the faith groups. They have to comply. And I have given an example that some of our faith groups who have established branches in UK, they have been found wanting, and they have seen how the law have taken its course. And so Nigerians should not be an exception, because this victory that we are celebrating today also calls for responsibility. And that responsibility is not just the government alone. It cut across all stakeholders, both in all financial institutions, the private sector, and the faith groups, and Nigerians as an individuals. Because what attracted this bad image to the country while we lost our integrity in the global financial system was not just caused by one entity alone. We all have responsibility to ensure that this victory that we have secured, that we don't relapse back. And to sustain the compliance, first, there must be that continuous political will from the presidency to continue to provide support for EFCC, NFIU, and all the anti-corruption agency. And then the minister has to provide that leadership through making sure that the interagency cooperations is sustained. There should not be an exception. And that's why I said that the position of the role of the judiciary is very important in complying with the law. Because without the cooperation of the judiciary, we will not be able to continue to sustain this reform. And that's where their knowledge about the Proceeds of Crime Act is very fundamental. Without knowledge, you cannot be able to come up with a judgment. If EFCC, NFIU carry out their own task, and the judiciary do not help to ensure that those who commit the crimes are brought to justice, including those in the faith group, we are going to have challenge in the country. And that's why I think that cooperation among all stakeholders is very fundamental. Training of the judicial officer is fundamental, and it's an appeal to the minister to continue to provide this leadership in coordination for the interagency. And the president must continue to support. Nigerians should continue to support the law enforcement agency, EFCC, NFIU. Our cynicism will not help this country. Now, I don't see most stakeholders celebrating this victory, particularly the opposition party. We have a country. We don't have another country. We have responsibility to commend government when they do well. Under this removal of Nigeria from the green list, we must commend President Tinubu. He has done well. And Nigerians should support this government to ensure that this reform is sustained. It is not what the government alone can do. All stakeholders, the private sector, the faith groups, the media, just like what NTA is currently doing.
Reverend Ugola, thank you. Thank you. I think we have some messages coming. Yenri, do you have?
Yes, I do.
Okay, please, let's quickly take it before we go to Gombe.
All right. Some of the messages that we have right here that have come in this morning. Well, this one here says, Nigeria's exit from FATF grey list is a welcome and good development for Nigeria's image and economic growth. I pray for sustainable effort towards this achievement. And that's coming from Yusuf in Bauchi. The next one reads, good morning, NTA, good morning, Nigeria, and to all our guests. Most of us may not see the impact or gains of Nigeria being included or excluded, if you like, exit from the FATF grey list, because there's no tangible difference to the average Nigerian. But what I'm most interested in is the management of the proceeds of crime. Telling us that the recovered proceeds of crime is part of the funds used for student loan policy is being clever by half. And there's no transparency in the process. Such funds should be channeled to palpable projects that the blind can see. That's coming from Enteng Philip from Abakaliki.
Okay, I have two. The first one has no name, but I read it all the same. Expressing my opinion on the FATF exit from grey list. Firstly, kudos to all the stakeholders who made it happen. But still a lot of work to be done to block all means of paying ransom to criminals like kidnappers in Nigeria. How come they have not been arrested and while they are transacting ransom collections? Secondly, all these Yahoo boys and girls and other cyber criminals should be blocked and prosecuted. May God help us. Thanks. I wish you also added your name so that we can appreciate you even better. But all the same, thank you. Michael Uchobi, you have sent in your message. You want to know what efforts the NFIU is making to stop most of the serving and past politicians from laundering and recovering most of our monies laundered abroad. Lately, a former governor has been pointed to paying school fees for his children to a very worrisome amount. Kindly give us an insight of what your agency is doing as regards that, and not just paying school fees. We've also heard of, big top Nigerians also, doing other things just to launder money abroad. Let's get your reaction.
Thank you very much for those questions. And I think, obviously, we can't speak to cases that are currently before the court, and the process is there. So, obviously, I cannot speak to the particular instance that that individual has mentioned. But I think from a broader perspective, one of the things that we at the NFIU, and particularly the reason for setting up financial intelligence units, is to provide for this international cooperation. So every country across the world is required to set up a financial intelligence unit. And these financial intelligence units work together. So we exchange information on a regular basis. We exchange intelligence on a regular basis. And that intelligence does support the work that is being done by law enforcement agencies, whether it's locally or internationally. So we are doing quite a lot in terms of that international cooperation to address these issues of illicit financial crimes, or indeed of money that may have exited from Nigeria, irrespective of what crime it is. So whether it's corruption, fraud, drug trafficking, if there are proceeds of crime that have left Nigeria, we do have the capability by seeking support from our counterparts in other countries.
What of cash out from crypto coins there? Yes.
So
how come they are not?
So the crypto space is actually an evolving space, and this is something that everyone is struggling with across the world. It's not just Nigeria that we have this challenge. It's an emerging area. And I think what the Securities and Exchange Commission have done, and what their collaboration with the central bank, as well as other stakeholders, is trying to find a way for Nigeria to put in place an effective regulatory framework for virtual assets transactions in Nigeria. Grace mentioned that under the previous act, we now have a definition for virtual assets, and this requires anyone that's providing these virtual assets in Nigeria to report these transactions. But the challenge with virtual assets is they exist across the world. So you may be operating in another jurisdiction. You're providing services to clients in Nigeria. So again, part of the international standards now, and the work that the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, is trying to do, is to put in a new framework for how these transactions will be reported internationally. So making sure that irrespective of where the transaction happens, if that transaction does touch your nation, that you will have access to that information. And I think this speaks to the comments we've had about sustainability. As Olagoke said, the environment is always dynamic, is always changing, and we cannot rest on our oars and say that we have exited the grey list and therefore we're not doing any more work. We are constantly trying to look at what is the next challenge, the next threat, the next vulnerability that we're going to face. And certainly crypto is one of these threats, and there's a lot of work being done to put in a framework that responds to this.
Many thanks, Mohammed. Let's get to Dr. Simon now. So much has been said. He's talking about more work needs to be done. I would like you to speak to that. What kind of work do you think we should do, and how can we strengthen the processes so far? Not just because we're trying to avoid being blacklisted by FATF, but just so that we can strengthen our financial system and also better our people. So what would you like to see going forward?
Sharpen the tools and the anti-money laundering, countering of financing of terrorism framework. That lies at the heart of this battle. And it's not just because we don't want to be blacklisted, like you rightly mentioned. We should go beyond that. The chief of staff of the FIU mentioned that we have exceeded some standards. So we need to maintain that tempo. We need to ensure that some of these reforms, whether the laws that we have implemented or the operationalization of Nigerian sanctions, or the beneficial ownership register to know who exactly is behind certain companies and how they have sourced their money, whether it's questionable or not. So we need to deploy all the weapons in the arsenal, all the tools that we can deploy to ensure that we have the most robust financial system, and illicit financial flows, whether from across borders or domestically, do not pass through without being detected and investigated and prosecuted. And the ultimate is to prevent these things from even happening in the first place. And we need to do everything possible to get the full membership of FATF so that we can be at the forefront. And mind you, the mutual evaluation, our next mutual evaluation is coming up in 2027. So we have to do everything possible to ensure that we don't fall into the gray list again that we are celebrating already. So it's like we said, it's not yet the voodoo. 2 years is not far off. They are coming for another mutual evaluation, another peer review. And if we do not maintain these reforms, particularly the enforcement of some of these laws that we have launched or have enacted, then this celebration might likely be premature. But I trust the process. I think we have done well. 84 items were flagged, and we have demonstrated capacity to tackle all of them over the years. So I hope that we maintain the tempo so that we don't get into trouble again. And then ultimately the benefits of exiting this list can actually trickle down. And some people in the question said, they don't actually see the benefit, and they're right. It's not something that happens overnight. It's going to take a while. And for that benefits to eventually trickle down, we have to ensure that everything is done the right way, and we continue to sustain the enforcement of these reforms, and we'll continue to get better results for the Nigerian people.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. Thank you. Let me come back to Mr. Slough. You know, again, legal consent was that's the first thing the Chief of Staff mentioned as a consent for the FATF. And luckily, he says, we've been able to address the concerns raised in that area. But every day you read online, social media, from individuals, from group of people, still, talking about the lapses within our judicial system, within our legal system and all that. So in moving forward and staying delisted within this legal framework, what can we do?
Thank you very much for that question. I think, and I was listening to the news recently, and I heard that there is a directive that the members of the judicial system should be trained on some of these things, on the AML-CFC framework. I think it's very important. I think there is always, it's always important that you are trained, right? And I think particularly for people who are going to be prosecuting some of these cases, it's very important that they understand the weight, they understand the techniques, and they understand how to properly, adjudicate these cases. The second thing is around the process, like you mentioned. The process is going to continue to get stronger. I think one of the most important things we must understand is that nothing is static. Every day processes are changing. If you look at the Fatf recommendation, it's consistently changing. There's always new research. If you look at the work of the NFIU, for example, they have been releasing a number of publications. From 2021, almost every year, there's a new publication telling you new typologies, this kind of crime, this is how it's done. So if you read those documents, you get a lot of information. So my advice to the judiciary is to, continue to strengthen collaboration with, agencies like the NFIU, the regulators. If they can have a working panel, which I believe they do, I believe there can be sharing of information that will help, adjudicate this case effectively.
Okay. Before we come back to you, and of course, Henry will come back to you, we'll end our conversation. In terms of utilization of proceeds from crime, what can we do, not just to ensure there's transparency, but also to get the, buy-in, the confidence of the public? In all of this. Today we say, yeah, we are celebrating the listing of Nigeria from this great list. Yes, okay, we've met the 84. But the average Nigerian there doesn't even know what we're talking about. Except he says tangible, things done from the proceeds of these crimes?
Thank you very much. In terms of, utilization of the proceeds of crime, the average Nigerian wants to feel that he has a level playing ground to live and breathe, so to speak. So the proceeds of crime should be implemented in such a way that the average Nigerian on the street feels the impact. There should be investment in electricity, for instance, so that the average Nigerian feels I don't have to spend extra money to get fuel to sponsor my business. I know that, okay, electricity is taken care of. There should also be investment in, fuel, the petroleum sector, because that is one of the reasons that has made the average Nigerian's life difficult today. So if we begin to put these proceeds in key sectors, key areas that directly affect the daily living of Nigerians, they will begin to feel that, yes, the government is working.
So when we talk about things like this, they understand that, okay.
Yes, they understand, okay, this is where, or this is how this money was used to establish this, to ensure that you feel comfortable. And I'm so particular about electricity because as far as I'm concerned, that is a fundamental area that if it is dealt with in Nigeria, we keep having situations of our national grid crashing and all that. If such issues, if the proceeds from corruption, proceeds are invested in such area to ensure that we have a working system, Nigerians will feel the impact because they will be able to do businesses easily and with low cost.
Many thanks, Grace. That's a very important point that you have raised. We need to wrap up the conversation. I do not know if my producer will permit me to get to Reverend Ugolo quickly, and in 30 seconds I'd like him to respond to this. Now, how important is transparency and collaboration with civil society in maintaining international confidence going forward?
Thank you very much. Just to quickly say that in moving this direction, I want to congratulate the Minister for Justice, who has accepted to collaborate with African Network for Environment and Economic Justice and African Center with the support of the UK government, FCDO, to carry out training of all relevant organizations mentioned in the Proceeds of Crime Act, and we have carried out now technical needs assessment for about 8 organizations, which include EFCC, NFIU, NAPTIP, NDLA, and others. And the whole aim is that from the report from the technical needs assessment is to build their capacity to be able to sustain their work and be able to carry out their task and responsibility as spelled out by the Proceeds of Crime Act of 2022. And so that's one concrete way civil society is collaborating with the government in sustaining this reform and victory, and to see that this victory is sustained, and which also brings responsibility. And the responsibility I mentioned is the role that each stakeholders contribute. And so for us as civil society, we are helping to build the capacity. There's also going to be a training for the judicial officers across the country on the Proceeds of Crime Act, so that they will be familiar with the law. And so during prosecution, they will help sustain and help empower the prosecution process in the
All right, many thanks, Reverend Ugolo. Because of time, thank you so much. And I hope the civil society will do much more just so that we can sustain this. We need to wrap up the conversation. Mohammed, I'd like to hear your final words to Nigerians just so they can begin to feel the impact of all of this. And if FATF evaluates Nigeria in 2 years, are you confident that we'll still pass?
So I'll start with your second question because I think this is the most important takeaway we have today. When the FATF team were here in August, they met with His Excellency the Vice President, who represented Mr. President. And one of the things that he said during that speech was that for Nigeria, these reforms are fundamental to our nation's economic reforms going forward. And this was a point that was reiterated by the Attorney General of the Federation and the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Interior last week. So for us, going forward, we believe that the next mutual evaluation, we already have established a strong basis, and we are well placed for success if we sustain those reforms. So we're hopeful that we'll
Yes, we'll want to take just 30 seconds from Gombe before we wrap up. Dr. Simon, please go ahead. 30 seconds.
I'll make it quickly. I think all these things boils down to kitchen table economics. If you ask an average Nigerian, you mentioned the exiting of grey list, that's esoteric to him. What really matters is how does that improve his living standard? How does that create job for him? How does that increase his income? How does that make life better for him? So if we don't maintain these gains, then ultimately they will not trickle down. So we need to sustain the enforcement of these reforms. We need to make sure that the results are delivered so that every Nigerian feels the impact of exiting the grey lists.
Thanks, Dr. Samson Galadima Simon, Chief Economist, ARC Economics and Data Limited. Thank you for joining us all the way from Karel, Gombe, North-East Nigeria. It was indeed a pleasure to have you. All right. We'd also like to appreciate Reverend David Ugol, Executive Director, African Network for Environment and Economic Justice, ANEJ, and member of the Interim Executive Council of the Non-State Actors of African Union Advisory Board Against Corruption. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us again, Reverend. It was a pleasure to see you. Grace Orahachi Ehusani, Esquire, Head of Chambers at Greenfield Chambers, Abuja. Thank you so much. And of course, Alago K. Said Salau, AML, CFT, that's the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Financing of Terrorism Strategist and Head of Financial Crimes Compliance at Sterling Bank. Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. And Mohammed S. Ahmed, Chief of Staff to the CEO of NFIU. Thank you for your time. And of course, we hope to have you some other time and hope that in 2 years when we have you, it would also be a success story. Madam Claire, would you permit me to say that those in the studio do not know what Esusu and do they know?
Yes, I'm sure Salah knows.
They look like the younger generation.
Sure. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.
I'm Henry John. Living locked on the NTA.